And then friggin' rain.
And our first item is our Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Vice Chair, could you read our mission statement?
The mission of the Marshall Public School District is to educate, support, and prepare all learners for success.
Thank you. Approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
I'll second.
Any additions? Hearing none, we'll vote. It is approved. Public forum. Now's the time the public can approach the board. Is there anybody in the public that would like to approach the board? Moving on to our first presentation, the budget presentation. Mr. Karen, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Board. Quite a bit of information this year with all the different funding we have and everything that's gone over the last year or two. A lot of the slides are the same, but the information is different. Enrollment, the past 3 years have been kind of a roller coaster with COVID. Enrollment was 41 students less in 1920 than 1819. Then we saw an increase in 2021, up 29 students. This year we had a nice increase of about 50 students. That is using the 6-1 enrollment numbers, helping us to get back on track where we thought we'd be. Revenue is figured out with the adjusted school year pupil units. We should have that number in July. It's a weighted and an average that a lot of our revenue is figured off of, not just the number of students themselves. We are estimating another increase around 20 students in 22-23, and then a little decrease over the next couple of years. We've got a couple of large classes coming through the high school. Some good news, open enrollment. Keep in mind that these numbers are what's reported in Mars student system and may be different from the final MDE numbers. Numbers not counting the Maytech students. In 21-22, there were about 267 open enrolled into Marshall Public Schools from other districts, compared to the 230 Marshall Public resident students that open enrolled in other districts. This is a positive of 37, which is a nice turnaround since in 2021 there was a negative difference of 5, and in 2019-2020 the negative difference of about 13. So that's a positive number that we looked at, and as I had a conversation with Tricia about this with Mars and everything, really COVID is probably one of the main drivers of getting those numbers back. Some other demographics to go over. To the left are numbers in a graph representing our free and reduced percent. We've talked about this quite a bit over the last couple of years. Typically each year we see a gradual increase in our free and reduced population. In 2020, 2021, we saw a dramatic decrease. This was directly due to the free federal food, breakfast and lunches that were offered. This year with some additional effort, even with the free breakfast and lunch all year, the number of applications went up slightly. Free and reduced numbers directly affect revenue funding, such as title programs and our compensatory. Right now, it looks like the meals going this fall will go back to regular paid meals. So Jill and I are going to do some extra work just to make sure parents know that that's a possibility going into the fall, so they know that it's not free coming up. And then also an extra effort to get those free and reduced apps out early and try to get the numbers back to where we need them so we can get those funding numbers back up. As you guys know too, with paid meals, that'll directly affect our negative balances, which has gotten down, I think, right at a little under $4,000. So we're sitting good there right now. To the right is our special education student demographics. After a slight decrease of 6 eligible students in 2021, we saw a large increase last year of about 74 that qualified for services. And you'll see that when we talk a little bit about staffing for next year.
That's pretty dramatic. Almost 24% of our student population is special needs,
Yeah.
especially with no total reimbursement for the program.
And I can only believe that, and Jeremy can talk a little bit about that if he wants, but a lot of that would be us going back face-to-face this year from the distance learning hybrid.
Yeah, we saw an increase in referrals this year and students qualifying for services, where last year that number was down. They weren't in person and we didn't have as many referrals to look at. So that had a lot to do with our numbers this year.
That's a huge number, though.
It is
I mean,
a huge
that-
number.
That does drain our budget in terms of we're not getting totally reimbursed for the program.
And we do ask the board each time we need additional help, but as you know, with special ed, with the number of students, there isn't, we do need it. We do have to have that staffing to go with that.
Oh,
But you're right,
absolutely.
Bill, it's the funding.
No doubt. Well, and the one thing that we can be proud of, we offer wraparound services in Marshall, Minnesota, from, 0 to 21, which parents move here because of that.
The next slide shows our minority demographics. Our EL participation number has also bounced back. We saw a slight decrease from 429 in 2019-2020 to 371 in 2020-21. This number has increased back to 425 in 21-22. So we're heading in the right direction on a lot of our numbers. Classroom size, I did do just a little adjustment as we got the June 1st numbers in, just showing the different class sizes we have. We show this each year. Our preschool, we cannot have more than 20, and I think most of our class sizes we have are right around that 20 or 18 to have the ideal numbers. Kindergarten, we have 8 sections right now, 20 per teacher is our guideline, and we think we have this conversation every year. We're just a little above that at 21.4, but with our kindergarten aides, we feel like that offsets that.
Right, we have a paraprofessional in each one of those rooms.
Correct, yep. First, second, third, and fourth grade, as you can see, we're all those grades are underneath where the target guideline is. Second grade, we'll be adding a 9th section, and I talk about this a little later, but if you remember, I think it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago, we actually had 9 sections in second grade. We decreased that because we had a small grade coming through. So we'll be back at 9 sections, and Southview was built for 9 sections for each. 5th through 8th grade, there's some shifting going on there to make sure that we're still falling within those guidelines, and you can see that those are right at the guidelines for each class. So we'll keep an eye on those. And then high school, 28 students per teacher. I'm not sure if we're at that for next year or the following year because we've got some pretty big class sizes going through the high school.
Question on the middle school. Students per section, is that impacted all by the new scheduling
This is looking at just the core classes.
or classes?
So,
Okay.
yeah, we built that schedule to ensure that we would meet those
Okay.
guidelines within that new schedule. It did have a big impact as we were staffing, and we'll talk about that when we look at staffing later
Yeah, I
today
was just
too, but,
wondering.
Yeah, we built the schedule to ensure that we met our guidelines.
Special ed staffing, we talked about this a little bit when we were talking about the special ed numbers. Special education staffing is determined based upon the overall caseload needs and the demands. Caseloads may vary from teacher to teacher based on the overall identified needs and services at the time. We'll get in the meat of the budget here. So the first part to talk a little bit about is the salary. Broke it down a little bit because the 4.97 is a number that stood out to me, the 4.9% increase compared to the 3.46 in prior years. right around that 3.5. So I just want to break it down for the board. There's a few reasons for the higher amount. We have 2 staff that we hired this year that were previously this year. Next year they'll be employees that they were contracted services. So there's 2 staff that we're bringing on as employees that now would show up into the salaries instead of the purchase services. Along with that, we have that 9th section in 2nd grade that's an additional teacher hiring on. We also have an additional special ed teacher at Southview that was needed. And then we have a couple of positions that we decreased in 21-22 this year that we'll need to bring back, and that's the halftime counselor at the high school and then a language arts teacher at the high school. So if you take all that into account, it equals just in salary about $286,000, which would bring the difference from the 1 million down to about 772, which is right around that 3.6%. The biggest one there are the 2 staff that we're hiring on that were contracted services. I believe we actually have a little savings between that and there are employees now. So benefits I won't spend a lot of time on. A lot of that goes along with the increase of the salaries. But as you can see, our benefits actually are holding a little less than prior. We're 5.5% increase this year compared to 6.13. Purchase services leveled off. You can see we only have about a 0.55%. We saw an increase or a decrease. 2021, we saw a decrease due to the hybrid and distance learning of the utilities. In 2023, you should see a slight increase. But again, we have some offset, close to about $100,000 between those 2 staff members. Supplies, that one there is really all over the place with COVID the last couple of years, but show a pretty large decrease in 22-23. You can also see in 21-22, we showed a decrease in supplies over 2021. That would be due to us budgeting and spending less each year in the COVID PPE supplies. We were spending quite a bit of money in those departments. Our capital expenditures under the general fund, there's capital outlay fund, and then there's our capital expenditures that we code under our general fund. You're going to see, again, a large decrease from 21-22 to 22-23. A few reasons for that is we have currently this year, 21-22, we had 2 leases left for one-to-one devices. We made one of our last payments on one of those, so we don't have a payment next year for that. We're down to 1 payment on our leases for those. 1 payment, and then we'll have no leases actually left. So that's about $67,000. Another reason is in 21-22 that shows about $200,000 worth of one-to-one devices that we purchased for this year. And I had mentioned prior that we had received some COVID technology funding to offset that $200,000. And then on the flip side, we have our CTI certificate of participation payment that's new to this year. So 17% is kind of skewed with taking some of those COVID things into account. You can kind of see on the graphs too, the supplies really looks odd with the 2 years in there. So overall, we're looking at about 1.17 or 1.1 million with 3.58% increase in expenditures. Revenue, just break down a few things in each revenue section. Our local revenue increase is around 54,000. The main driver in there is we should see an increase in our tuition agreement revenue. State revenue, total increase is around 809,000. Majority of that increase is due to general aid and a nice turnaround with our compensatory, which decreased over 300,000 in 21-22. And I'll break some of those numbers down for compensatory coming up, but we saw that bounce back a little bit. Levy revenue, Slight overall increase, about 48,000. Majority of that is to our career and technical portion of the levy. Federal revenue, our title programs show a slight increase. This is due to large reason for that is due to our carryover from 21-22. Otherwise, our title program revenue in 22-23 has actually shown a decrease of the amount we're receiving from 21-22, and that is main reason to that is our free and reduced. They hold harmless on the number for 21-22, and for 22-23, as far as we know, they're counting our actual numbers. So I think Title I was around $50,000 less. That's why we carry over some of that money just in case that happens. Federal special ed revenue is showing a bigger increase. This is mainly due, again, not to sound like a broken record, but to the two contracted services we had this year that are now employees. The federal funds are ran through SWWC, and previously the federal funds were deducted up front for contracted services for these two people. Now, since they're employees, we'll receive the full funding directly, and we can still use that funding to offset their revenue and benefits. So it's not really an increase, it's more of just a shift. And then COVID funding. We'll talk a little bit more about that coming up in a slide, but as you can see in the last 3 years, we've received different COVID funds, 21-22 and 22-23. We've almost utilized a little over $2 million each year. A majority of that is to help offset some of our regular current expenditures. In an upcoming slide, I'll show you a breakdown of those funds. And unfortunately, unless we receive more funds, which I haven't heard anything about, those funds will run out at the end of 23-24. So in revenue overall, we're looking at $1,081,432 increase, which gives our general fund estimate a deficit spending of right around $306,000. We'll shift to transportation. Slight change in expenditures. Keep in mind 2021 was a higher contracted service rate due to COVID, and we had split routes, so we were charged a little more. I know that the increase doesn't seem very much, but when you go back to previous normal years, it falls in line. I looked at that one several times. So, and then revenue. We utilized some of the COVID federal funds to offset some of our expenditures in 21-22. So we most likely won't do that in 22-23. So you'll see a decrease in revenue under that CARES federal funding. Overall, transportation, not too bad. Typically we have a decrease, but we're estimating right around $15,216. So again, the graph kind of gets skewed over the years now with COVID being 3 years in the making. Capital funds, you'll see an increase in expenses, and it really doesn't offset with what I'm going to tell you we're all doing with our capital funds, but that just we offset some of those things with some of our capital leases, which are typically split between general and capital outlay. But we have a lot of capital needs this year. One is at our high school, replacing the computer labs, the computers in the computer labs next year. I think I'd counted like 60 of them. We need to actually replace those computers. We can't use the one-to-one devices because the programs that are put on those computers need more memory than the one-to-one devices can hold for the teacher for their programs. Also, we have a couple of vehicle needs. One was our van, our red van that we use it's kind of a third van, is reaching the 10 years old, and that's by law, we can't transfer students after 10 years. We had purchased the van in October to use capital funds that we had budgeted. That van won't be here until July, we hope. And so that actually funds are carrying over from 21-22 into 22-23. And then the other one is we have a 2000 GMC. that we use for snow removal and custodian needs. We did a little work on it. We don't want to spend a lot of money on it, but at 21 years old, it's towards the end of its life. So we were able to secure a pickup that's in this budget here through a governmental agency that they're able to build them. And we'll still keep the gray pickup, the 2000, out at the CTI Center with the plow on it so they can use it out there and also use it to move equipment, whether it's a motor or whatever, from storage to the classroom. LTFM, we continue to be pretty aggressive in attending our building needs, interior and exterior. At the next board meeting, I'll outline in more specifically those projects that we're doing this year and then down the road, as you guys will have to approve the 10-year LTFM plan like you do every year. But just a few of them that you'll notice, a lot of them at the middle school. That's one of the older buildings that needs to be attended to. The track should be started to be worked on this week. They started doing the retrofitting of the lighting already today. They're working on the HVAC system or the IEQ project. We got the classroom windows being replaced, the carpets being replaced, and then we continue with the renovation of the pool area. Revenue in LTFM decreased a little bit. The LTFM is calculated off the number of pupil units, as well as the building square footage and building age. With the opening of Southview and the closing of West Side, our building age decreased as our revenue, along with our revenue. But we should see that bounce back every year. It won't take that long to get it back. Capital revenue, main decreases in the local revenue. Some years we have projects which local boosters or donations come in to support some projects. We don't have any of those projects right now, so I didn't budget anything in the revenue. Overall, we're looking at deficit spending $453,308 in 2023. I'll show you later, we've got a pretty healthy, and we've talked about this, pretty healthy balance, fund balance in our capital, and a lot of needs in the district, so spending down is necessary. So our overall general fund, although we separate things out with general transportation and capital outlay, MDE recognizes them all as one fund under one general fund umbrella. Total deficit spending between all three is around $775,000. Again, a majority of that's the $453,000 from our capital. Any questions before I continue? All right. Food service, just go over just a little bit. We're going to see a lot of changes next year with the food service returning to paid lunches instead of free. So we're projecting expenditures and actual decrease. Food milk, with it not being free breakfast and lunch, even with an increased cost, we feel will be a decrease in the total. Looking back in 18-19 at the last normal year, expenditures were a little over $686,000. So it's about, we're projecting at $768,000. So it's a hefty increase from the 18-19 year last normal year. Decrease in equipment supplies is due to mostly supplies of not having to do the grab and go bags. Revenue, it's going to be hard to follow because most of our revenue over the last 2 years was federal. Now with spreading it out to state, federal, and sales, basically took our total revenue and split it out between the three. Again, with federal revenue on the free and reduced, or free breakfast and lunch, we're expecting a decrease in the total revenue because we won't probably be serving as many breakfasts and lunches. Even with all of that, we're still expecting a slight excess of $5,968. And graph kind of back to normal, if you want to call it that, in 22-23. Community services, expenditures, slight increase in most categories, with around $40,000 increase in ABE. Most of theirs is offset by revenue and grants. Revenue, community services is showing a decrease. That's mainly in the non-public aid, which is calculated off their enrollment. ABE revenue is showing an increase, and ECFE a slight decrease in their state aid. Overall, we're showing in excess of $22,284 in community services. Debt service fund expense, which is our principal and interest bond payments, increases about almost $200,000. That is mostly offset by the revenue received and is still showing in excess of $311,000 in that fund balance. The excess is added to the debt service fund balance, which is going to be needed down the road. We have those two QZAB bonds, which are paid in one payment each one. One's due in 2027 and one's due in 2030. So, summary, the fund balance comparison. Top section shows the 2021-2022 revised budget. It's not actual, it's still the revised budget. We won't get the actual till the audit. The bottom section shows the beginning and ending for the preliminary 22-23 budget, the excess or deficits and percentages that were just covered. This one here, again, the left shows the revenue expenditure comparison for each fund. The right, probably more so the bottom right, shows the percentage of where the estimated fund balance percentages are going to end. Again, that's with the 21-22 revised and the 22-23 preliminary, which show our general fund being decreased to about 13.85%. I know it's going to sound a lot of Debbie Downer as I go on here, but with that kind of a decrease, even if we were still to keep the federal funds for the next 4 years, if we were to deficit spend that much over 4 years, we'd be down to the 8.13%, which is where the board has set that. So I just want to hit on a few things. Compensatory, as we talked about, that bounced back a little bit. We just need to take into account that there was a huge loss from fiscal year 21 to fiscal year 22. And I did want to put on there because it's basically a 2-year lag that they look at. And then we did have a little bounce back from fiscal year 22 to 23, which is good. But if you look at that difference between fiscal year 23 and 21, where we should have been at, we're still down $138,000, and over the last 2 years, around $650,000 in revenue loss. Shared with you guys the COVID graph. This has been a fun one to track. Jeremy has helped quite a bit with this. It's great funds to have. We couldn't be operating the last 2 years without them. We'd be hurting without those funds. But as you can see, tracking them, not only the codes, the years that they're used, what years they need to be spent, and how they need to be spent has been a task. But I think we've done a pretty good job being fiscally responsible with these added revenues. As you can see, I broke down each year what we've either spent, budgeted, or estimated to have left. If everything keeps on track with the 22-23 budget, we still should have about $1.6 million left in revenue to spend on some of those.
We got to spend it by the end of 24?
They're all different.
Okay.
Yeah, some
We
of
don't
them.
have to go into that
Yeah,
then.
no, some of them
The
have
end
to
of
be
it,
spent
oh.
by
That would be the end of
September
all.
this year,
Okay.
some by September next year, but there are some funds. Anything that we carry over to 23-24 would be September of 24, so yeah, we don't want to miss the boat on any of them. I added this at the last second. I had a conversation with Ellers today. Just as we had talked about, not just the compensatory, but some of the different funds or deficit spending and using some of those federal funds that are soon to go away. We talk about this graph each year during the truth in taxation, the gap between the inflation and our formula allowance, which is the furthest it's ever been. And I think we all know with the way the economy is, it's probably going to go even further in a gap. Right now, the gap is about $798 per pupil, which if you use the Marshall Public Schools weighted pupil it'd be about $2.2 million difference between the two. And we're spending about $2 million in federal funds. So
If
just
we
kind of
had-
pointing out,
If our excess levy were still in place, that was $750 per pupil that we can levy without going to the taxpayers, am I right?
I'll get to that. Yes.
Okay, but I'm saying if we were able to put that back in place,
$724, but that's already in
724.
place.
and we haven't had that since 2018.
That's in place now.
It is in place now.
The board voted for that back in
Yeah,
2018.
yeah, that's right.
Yep. And that's been in place. It doesn't have to be renewed by the board. So it's a nice lead-in. So, and I know you guys hear this every time. It kind of floored me a little bit. I looked at my notes from last year. As you can see, I used the same PowerPoint, just update it. And the notes at the end of my presentation last year talked about how the additional federal funding it helps, but with legislature not passing in the past or probably in the future years to help keep up with inflationary and deficit spending over the last 2 years and budgeting for the third, we need to start putting the operating referendum to talks. Our deficit spending is a result of allowing the last operating referendum to expire, which the LOR did help with the board approving their authority at that 724. It was $675 per pupil last time, which at that time was around 1.5 million. If you put that in today, it would be right around 1.8. Was great to offset and not renew that for a few years to get some tax breaks going for our community. But as we talked about, if we want to spend the fund balance down, keep our class sizes down in programming, we're going to need to look for additional funds. That's what I had said last year. So you're going to hear a parrot this year. So this is kind of a history of our operating referendum. And I left out the technology and the security ones that were voted no. These were operating referendums. You can see in 2011, it was passed. It had $675. Was passed about 70% yes votes. The main purpose for that was our classroom size. And I believe there was talk about our programming and our technology at the same time too. That revenue expired in 2018, which at that time opened up some space for the board to approve their local option at 724. So by losing that $675, if you were to talk about right now, like I had said, it's about $1.8 million. During my conversation today with Ellers, because I want to make sure that we have all the information needed for the board and the community, they mentioned to me that 72% of Minnesota districts currently have an operating referendum. So it's 72% of the districts. The average per pupil is $850. That's average. Ours at that 2018 was $675. And
Is that 72% voter approved
Yes.
referendums you're talking
Currently.
about?
Yep.
Not board approved,
those are all current voter approved.
Okay.
Yep. So we're not going to see that gap close anytime soon. We're not going to see, obviously, the $9.5 billion be handed out, which is very upsetting when districts look at something like this, which it would have helped immensely. So what I would ask of the board, and I think Matt's going to talk a little bit about our finance committee meeting, is that we invite Ellers to our 20th board meeting just to do a presentation to the board to show what we're looking at, what dollar amount makes sense, and how it would impact the taxpayers. We won't have a vote on the 20th, but I think it's important information for the board and the community to hear before we get into trouble. And we've talked in the past too.
Well, we are in deficit spending, and we can't continue to do that.
Yeah, and if we were to, and this is up to the board, if we were to go to vote in November, that revenue wouldn't be recognized until 23-24. So Just got to keep in mind that there's that year lag to it, so.
There was the legislation, I think, that was still alive here at the end to increase that board-approved referendum. You know how much that was? Was it another $200?
I have to look. When I talked
It
to
obviously
others,
didn't
yeah.
pass with everything falling apart, but I thought it was still
I think
alive
that
at the
sounds
end.
right, Bill. That's kind of what I remember hearing too.
What was that, Bill?
That local or board-approved, I can't remember the acronym, what the board-approved referendum or levy, if you will.
It's LOR, local
LOR, thank you.
operational revenue.
There's legislation there to raise that dollar amount by about $200 per pupil, I thought it was.
That's on the floor now. And
It was until it all fell apart, yeah.
One more reason to ask them to do a special
Nothing's on the
Special
floor now.
session, yeah.
yeah, it's in the circus.
Any other questions at all? All right.
Thank you, Dion.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Board forum.
You want the finance committee summary from Matt first?
Sounds
Yep.
good.
That's what we're on. Okay, the finance committee met last Thursday. We discussed several things. A couple of them were 3 positions that the administration is requesting. Include a para-mentor, a media aide, and an interventionist at the middle school. I don't know how many of you know, but paras are about half of our staff. I think Dion said we had 86, something like that, paras this year, which is almost half of our staff. We've had a large turnover this year with para staff, which is always happening, and wanted to find ways to make a new para experience better. After reviewing several options, administration is proposing that we add a para mentor that would facilitate new para orientation along with meeting the new hires at their buildings to review operational related items. This position would be 760 hours a year, which is about half-time, I think. Yeah. And these hours would be flexible as we're hiring and people are leaving, and we're hiring paras all year round. So they'd be really busy at the beginning of the year and then when needed throughout the year. It'd be similar to the teacher mentor position, but for paraprofessionals.
Are they looking at adding a person, or is that gonna be absorbed by the current?
Be an additional person,
Additional person?
half-time.
Jackie Wooden put an excellent proposal together in terms of expectations of the position. The position would report to Jackie. And just speaking from my perspective, having been in the principalship, paraprofessionals come in running, and the teachers have a load of students to handle anyway. And so when paraprofessionals come in, they don't necessarily get the direction from the teachers that they need and the support, because the teachers are busy putting together a program for their kids. That's part of the problem, why we have the turnover.
And the estimated cost would be around $21,000 for that position, that half-time position. So, the other position was a media specialist at the middle school and high school. Oh, hold it. The media specialist, a media aide. The media aide. Right. The media specialist for middle school and the high school has been reassigned to the PAYS lab. Is it PAYS? Yep. Pause or PAYS?
PAYS, you're right.
PAYS lab teacher position. Instead of replacing this position, administration recommends we add additional time for the media aides. This would be 3 additional days per week. And then the intervention teacher at the middle school, this person will assist in providing math interventions. This is not a new FTE, but due to the restructuring of the middle school schedule, has allowed a current FTE to be restructured for these interventions. Additionally, the committee discussed the 22-23 budget proposal. As Gian shared, the district is looking at, that's changed since this was summarized to 308,000, whatever you said earlier, deficit spending for this year. We also discussed the need for an operating levy. As Dion has shared in the past, we are currently using COVID funds to offset some of our expenditures. When these funds have been exhausted, we will need to consider an operating referendum, and as Dion said, plan to invite Jody Zeswall from Ellers at either our next meeting or July meeting. Probably the next meeting, because we only have one meeting in July, so questions on that?
I just had, those 3 requests are in the budget currently for 22, 23. So if they're not approved, you would take them out, but just so you know that that's in that number.
Board reports and updates? Anybody else?
I have a collaborative meeting, children's collaborative meeting next week on the budget. It would be our school district appropriation for next year. There'll be some dialogue. I expect there will be some increase because there's a pretty good budget balance. So I'll let you know in July what that will be. And they directly deal with Dion with that income.
Very good. Any others? Moving on to our discussion items, discussion of recommendation of equity statement.
Yeah, I just wanted to share, I sent this to the board in their packet ahead of time, but thinking about kind of where we're at as a district and thinking about our new strategic plan, one of the pieces we've talked about is adopting an equity statement as a board. Done some work with our cabinet team, and really we found the Department of Education, Minnesota Department of Ed equity statement that we felt fits a lot of what we've talked about at the board table. I'd like to share that. I'm going to read that this evening. I thought we could discuss that a little bit. And I feel like this really encompasses our mission and core values. The statement reads, educational equity is a condition of justice, fairness, and inclusion in our system so that all students have access to the opportunities to learn and develop to their fullest potentials. The pursuit of educational equity recognizes the historical conditions and barriers that have prevented opportunity and success in learning for students based on races, incomes, and other social conditions. Eliminating those structural and institutional barriers to educational opportunities requires systemic change that allows for distribution of resources, information, and other support depending on the student situation to ensure an equitable outcome. Equity is different from equality. Equity is a principle that is based on justice and fairness, while equality demands everyone be treated at the same level. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit with the board, get your feedback on that. And then the other piece of that I'm proposing, it's in the packet as well, is the 10 Minnesota commitments to equity. This is also from the Department of Education. And really, as we attend meetings with the Department of Ed, they will highlight one of the commitments to equity as we're going through things. It really puts that lens, a little framework as we're doing our work to make sure that we have that equity focus through the work that we do. So thoughts from the board?
I like that we define what equity is. I think it's key for people to understand that equity is not equality. I think overarching that's really important. And then I do like these commitments to equity because then it talks about how.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we keep that at the forefront of our daily work, this is important to understand how we can have an impact on that. So I think I like the addition of the commitments.
What does it mean? What kind of systemic changes can we make?
What I see as a start for us is just as we're going through thinking about our goals and our planning and our budgeting, that we're looking at it, using this framework, and we're thinking, okay, are we including all? Are we making sure that we're accounting for all students and being equitable in distribution of supplies and resources? And
It talks about, the
programs.
statement talks about eliminating these barriers, which one of the barriers is incomes.
Mm-hmm.
And public school is not here to equalize incomes, I guess. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's not part of our.
No, but where that might make a difference is like a student coming in, if they have all the supplies they need versus don't have all the supplies they need, and recognizing that. And some of those pieces are making sure we're not requiring students to bring something that maybe they don't have access to, or making sure we're not, if we're talking about a topic that maybe a student has no prior exposure to, that we're explaining that ahead of time. So that might be some of the equity pieces with that.
And I don't know that from reading this, Matt, just from that standpoint, I don't know that that's anything different than a practice that this district has done for years. I mean,
Right.
I know that we've had teachers and we've had employees in this district that have gone out of their way to help students that have less means than others. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's been a practice. I think what this is really just kind of formalizing what has been a practice in this district for a long time.
Absolutely. And somebody new coming in, it lays out here is our expectation, for a new
That's why I
family
was
or staff.
asking about the changes. I think we've been doing this stuff, like you say, for years. I don't know that we need to change.
I think an important piece that coincides with this is our strategic plan. You know, if we fully align the things we say and do to our new strategic plan, this will certainly enhance our equity.
Mhm.
Any other comments? Thank you.
Plan to bring that back at another board meeting for approval.
Moving on to our discussion of safety and security measures.
I wanted to share that as well, just with the shooting at Robb Elementary in Texas recently and the the state of where we're at in the nation. A lot of the questions came to my office. I'm sure board members getting questions too about what does Marshall Public Schools have in place. So I wanted to put that together and to share. I shared this with the board last week in our board packet, and I want to share publicly as well. Some of those places we've put a lot of work into place with this over the past few years to make sure we have safe and secure buildings. But just to remind people of that, and I think think about the doorbell ringing and someone not having ready access to the office, that really reaffirmed why we made some of those changes. So I just want to walk through these and share these pieces too. But the doors at all sites are locked throughout the school day. The only access is through the main entrance, and people have to be buzzed in. Once they come in, they have to check in the receptionist, and we have the Raptor system. It's a system where they have to scan a driver's license to get in. It does an instant background check on anyone coming in the building. They have to have that check to be allowed access to the building. We have bulletproof protection added to the glassway at entryways of every site, so the extra safety precautions with all of that. We are an ALICE trained district, so all of our buildings are ALICE trained. It's an evacuation or a lockdown procedure that we use at all of our sites, and we complete annual safety training drills with staff and with students. We have lockdown protocols in place, again, the ALICE, but then as well just general lockdown procedures that are drilled 5 times a year at every site. And each office is equipped with lockdown buttons. That was a recent addition where there's a couple locations, every office, a button pushes and it instantly locks down all the doors and security at the sites. We have updated cameras and surveillance systems at all sites. When we're in lockdown, there's some extra blue lights on the outside of the building that would notify people outside that the building is in lockdown for staff that might be out, so they know they need to find shelter elsewhere. We have a Crisis Go app, it's called. It's an instant crisis communication tool that we use. I would say that certainly through COVID, we've struggled with that one. It kind of fell on the wayside, so it's something that we've been working this spring and we'll continue to train on this fall to make sure that becomes common practice. But it's a tool we use for checking attendance and getting messaging out to staff in an emergency situation. We have a crisis response team that meets, it's every other month they meet in person, and they have off months, there's work that they do. But every site is represented on that, and we have district leaders that make sure that pieces are kept track with that. We plan for response protocols, drills, all those sorts of things through that team. We also have a full-time school resource officer. We work with Marshall Police Department, and Sarah Van Louis is on site during every school day. Plus, just we have a very good relationship with Marshall Police Department in general. So when we have something, if she's not available, there's sometimes even when she's here, we need extra backup. When we had the different threats made at the middle school or the high school, for example, those bathroom threats, Marshall Police Department was instantly here, and they were part of all of that work that we did. And that relationship with that team is a valuable piece of our security piece as well. So I just wanted to share that as a...
Tricia said she's going to put that up on the website. Deb, are you going to put this in the paper? I think it would be important for our public to see what we do for safety.
Do we ever have an audit check? Does anyone ever check to see, are they just buzzing
Need a
people
copy of
in?
that, Deb?
Are they following procedure?
That's part of our drill procedures we've done is checking that and certainly watching as we go into different sites
Thank you.
too.
The drill procedures, I mean, is somebody actually going to check to make sure that they're following the procedures and it's not buzzing people in?
Yeah.
I worry about the high school because it's such a fluid campus.
Yeah. I guess I don't know that we've done a blind check of something like that, but it's
I
interesting.
think it'd be a good idea
Yeah.
to see what's really happening.
Yeah.
And do they ever check to make sure our door locks lock? Because
Say
one
that
in
is
Texas
something that we
didn't.
check.
Yeah.
Right.
So they check that, do they check, maybe they need to add that to maintenance to check it once a quarter,
Mhm.
once a month or something?
Yeah.
I mean, we do a lot of things, but I mean, it's still a pretty fluid campus.
There's a lot of people coming and going, so.
Is it, is there one drill a year for the Marshall Police Department to show up?
Oh, with the Marshall Police Department, they're part of all of the Alice drills that we do, so yeah, they're probably part of one
One?
a year, two a year.
Okay.
You're right, we have the mid-year staff one.
I think I talked to one administrator, and they didn't want it to be a prison, but nowadays, with 119 shootings in schools the past 3 years,
I'd say
I
when
mean, we just gotta be careful. We don't wanna be, I bet you they wish they would've done more in Texas.
Right.
You know,
When we added that lockdown system, that was a fear we had, is does it feel like it's too locked down or something, but we don't get the pushback that we anticipated we might have gotten. I think people get that.
I think nowadays, you can't be safe enough.
Right.
I think as a district, I mean, as far as the safety and security measures go, I think we are doing almost everything we can do. I mean, we have really, thanks to Dion's leadership and thanks to our administration's leadership, have done a lot to improve the security of all of our buildings in the last 5 years.
Well, I
That
agree
being
with
that
100%.
that being said, I do think that as a much bigger conversation than this school board, but as a state of Minnesota and a Department of Education level, I think we really need to have a serious conversation about helping our young people, helping our students address the mental health concerns that are in our district. Prior to the pandemic, and this was a stat that got my attention the first time Greater Minnesota was here, but prior to the pandemic, 1 in 5 students in our high school system had experienced a mental health challenge. 1 in 5. That's 20%. That was prior to the pandemic. Since the pandemic, that number has only increased. And I have a lot of passion about that one, but that is something that I think beyond this district at the state level, I do think that is a conversation that we need to have, because if you look at the underlying cause of all of these things that happen across the nation, all of them, it is students that are having trouble, people that are having trouble. And that's a question that I think, as a society, as a state, we really need to have a conversation about. And get off my soapbox now.
No, that's fine. And we said, like I said,
Yeah.
we've done amazing things for security. But if they don't follow the protocol,
Mhm.
it's worthless.
Yep.
I mean, if they just buzz on anybody, if a teacher opens up the door and goes in the side exit because it's easier to get the product in the office or into their room. I mean, you have to follow protocol.
Yeah.
That's why I'd like to see some blind checks every once in a while.
And I can tell you, well, no, it's not. And I can tell you from experience, just because I've been in the schools a couple of times this year and given a few presentations at classrooms and things, I can tell you that every time I come in, I walk in, as a school board member, have to sign into the Raptor, get my badge, and go through. I can tell you, I from what I see, we do a pretty darn good job of that.
One of the things that the crisis team has worked on this year, I'll just share with you, is a threat assessment protocol as well. And so the team has went through, what types of questions should we be asking on a threat assessment? Who should be involved in that threat assessment? And I think we've come up with a pretty comprehensive plan that not only involves the staff in the building that student is located, but we've involved staff from outside, principals, administration from other buildings to come in and kind of take an outside view if we feel like a student is having trouble or might present a threat to their school or their peers. And so that is something that we're working on getting in place in each of our buildings, probably starting next school year.
Tricia has been a co-chair in that committee too. She's done a lot of work with our safety procedures over the years in Marshall, and that's something we're going to greatly miss when she's gone. She brings a lot to that team.
You used to chair that committee.
I used to. Yep.
I just think nowadays we can't be too safe. You gotta be safe.
Yep. Absolutely.
Thank you. Enrollment updates.
Just want to share, my numbers were as of May 1st, and the June 1st numbers have come out now too, but I don't have those in front of you. just where we're at for the year. So on the enrollment document that's provided in your packet, we have the end of year last year, the beginning of the school year this year, and then comparing where we're at from the May 1st date back to each of those dates. So on the far right, we look at a change from month to month, and then going back to October 1st, because October 1st is the date that a lot of our pieces tie back to with the state numbers that we report. So increase, decrease from last year's, I'll highlight here too, there's kind of two charts. It's by grade level on top, and then it's by site on the bottom of this document. So the top, when we're counting in that piece, it does not include the early childhood numbers. The bottom piece does. The increase, decrease from last year, you'll see we were on May 1st, 94 students higher than where we were at the end of last school year. And then looking at from October 1st, we're up 2 yet from where we were October 1st. Those numbers are good. And then looking at by site overall with everybody, we had 79 students up from last year. And it was a change of increase of 40 from October 1st, which a lot of those numbers were early childhood numbers that kind of fluctuate throughout the year. But those numbers were looking very positive this year. So I wanted to share that with the board. Any questions on that?
It's a good trend. Moving on to our discussion item of second review of policies 618 through 620, 623, and 624. It's a second reading. Did anybody have any questions? And moving on to our action items, approval of the driveway access easement with the City of Marshall. Motion to approve. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
It's open for discussion.
Sure, this is for at the CTI site, so that site used to be one property. When they split it, there's still only one driveway, so this is to share that driveway with the city who owns the other half of the property.
Any questions? Hearing none, we'll vote. Is approved. Approval of the Hoffman and Bros fiscal year 2022 audit services.
So moved.
Again.
It's open for discussion.
It's the annual letter of agreement. Leanna was waiting excitingly for it because she'll be heading up our audit this year.
All right, any further discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Is approved. Approval of the 22-23 agreement with Greater Minnesota Family Services. Motion to approve. Need a second.
Second.
It's open for discussion.
Okay. Aaron mentioned earlier we see a great need of mental health with our students, so this has been a great service. Greater Minnesota has offices in the buildings, and so we're happy to be able to negotiate a contract we're comfortable with for going forward.
Any questions? Please vote. Is approved. Approval of our food service provider.
Motion to approve.
Need a second.
I'll second.
It's open for discussion.
Last board meeting, in my administration report, I just went over the bid point calculator to show Taher had edged out the competition. Attached is the 22-23 cost reimbursement contract with Taher. It is a one-year contract that, if we choose, can be extended up to another 4 years.
Any questions? Please vote. It is approved. Approval of superintendent incentive compensation for the 21-22 school year. Motion to approve it. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, please vote. It is approved. Authorization to advertise and hire those positions that we talked about. Motion to approve. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion?
Matt really shared our discussion from the finance committee, but the mentor position is one that we're really excited about. We really think that will help us retain some staff and provide extra support to our paraprofessionals, similar to what we provide for our teachers. So.
Any other comments? Hearing none, please vote. It is approved. Personnel, do we have a motion?
So moved.
Need a second.
I'll second.
It's open for discussion. Hearing none, please vote. It is approved. Thank you, board meetings. This meeting is adjourned.